So subsequently, we put out a request for proposal, or an RFP, and that went out on July 17th of 2019. And the deadline for that was August 23rd of 2019. We did have a couple of inquiries in regards to the proposal and a couple of questions, but ultimately we only received one proposal, and that was from Jensen Hughes. Just to give you a little background on Jensen Hughes and the folks and the contractors that work with them. They also previously had another company, or worked with another company called Geo Elements. And between Geo Elements and Jensen Hughes, they've put together community wildfire protection plans for Carpinteria Summerlin, City of Montecito, Santa Rosa, Goleta, and also even Geo Elements put together the Santa Monica Mountains wildfire protection plan that I believe was done in 2013. So they do have extensive background in doing these CWPPs, and we're actually very happy that they did submit a proposal and that we were able to hire them as a consultant. So the performance period for the CWPP for the grant was from June 6, 2019 until March 15th, 2021. So that means services rendered by Jensen Hughes can only be billed for work that was done between those two dates. So again, we are coming up on the sunset of that this Monday. So we're trying to get as many edits and things done that we can get done before then. And then the grant period is over, and then any work that we do above and beyond that, we'll have to take care of ourselves with Jensen Hughes. So part of that process, initially meeting with myself and Susan, Chris Frost was part of our core group, the chair of the Public Safety Commission. Drew Smith from LA County Fire Department was part of our core group. So we spent 2 days driving around with all the consultants and contractors from Jensen Hughes, all the wildland experts that were going to work on our plan, just to kind of show them around and answer any questions they might have and show them some of the concerns that we had. So then after that, a big part of a CWPP is that there's collaboration with stakeholders, governmental, non-governmental, and the residents at large. So we did host 2 community meetings. Fortunately, we snuck these in pre-COVID. They were on February 20th and February 22nd in the multi-purpose room at City Hall. Those were very well attended, and Jensen Hughes was already able to produce some maps and fire history maps and some information like that they're able to share that kind of showed the direction where they were going. So those were pretty well attended. We also realized that not everybody could attend those meetings. So we commissioned or Jensen Hughes did, they put together a Survey Monkey that we advertised also through social media and various other sources, so that people could do that community survey. That started in early March, and it was going to close in April. And then due to COVID, we extended that, and I think it went until late May or early June even. So we did extend that. The results of that community survey we did publish and we put out and for everybody to see, and those are available on the website. So that's kind of how we got to where we are right now, and reviewing this draft that we have right now. Hey, Sarah, I'm seeing that there's 3 people in the waiting room. 2 people.
I just told her.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep, sorry about that. I
Okay.
had scrolled down to the bottom of the list.
Okay, thank you very much. So on the Wildfire webpage, we did have a section on the CWPP, and one of the things that we had in there were frequently asked questions. And so just to clarify what a community wildfire protection plan is, overall, a lot of the background work that they did does look at things like critical infrastructure. It looks at the city as a whole and the hazards that we have. It looks at all that, but when it comes to the recommendations, it's not possible for it to be all inclusive. So what it does, and I'm just going to read these couple of bullet points off of these frequently asked questions. It's a community-based plan focused on identifying and addressing local hazards and risks from wildfire. A CWPP determines what is at risk and provides a roadmap of actions for a community to address the wildfire threat. Second bullet point, and this is a big one really, because it opens up funding for us. It may open up state and federal funding opportunities to implement the plan. If you have a CWPP in place and it has projects identified that need to be done, it's much easier to ask for grant funding for that when you have these identified projects. So that's a huge one. And they are also, the CWPP is authorized and defined in Title I of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act passed by Congress in 2003. So another couple of little items here is the CWPP, and if you look at the action plan in section 8, and there are some recommended actions and mitigations. And I just want to stress that these are their recommendations. They're not trying to bypass any CEQA regulations. We're not trying to bypass or do any harm or damage to ESHA. These are all just recommendations, and it serves as a guide for us. Use that guide. We look at each one of those projects, and that's just a base for us to start the implementation process. So each one of those we have to go through. Sarah, can you hear me? I just got it unstable on my internet.
Yep, you're good to go.
Sorry, I just got it unstable. Okay. So each one of those projects have to be evaluated individually, and they can be considered individually. So I just want to make clear, this isn't any kind of an ordinance. If the city council approves this, it's not an ordinance. It's not a rubber stamp that the next day we're going to hit the road and start carrying out all these projects. They all have to be considered individually. We have to look at, the process that we want to go through. If there's CEQA or ESHA involved, we need to address all those items and do it accordingly. So it's just not opening the door, to go crazy on stuff. So I just kind of want to make those couple of points before we go into this process, just because it seems like with some of the feedback we've been getting, there is a little bit of concern. If you'll notice in there on the projects, there are no prescribed burns. There are a couple of little vegetation treatment areas. They're not very big. And again, when it comes time to do those, if we don't want to do them, we don't do them. If we can't do it in a way that everybody can agree on, then we just don't do them, and that's fine. So, and then the last thing is, this is about a 5-year plan. So if we can go through that action plan in section 8 and get done what we deem as a city that we can get done, 5 years from now, we can revisit that and we can bite off some more projects that we can do and continue on. It's a starting point. It's not all inclusive. It's not going to take care of everything, nor will it take the place of other priorities that we have. It's not going to, well, just that. If we have other priorities, undergrounding of utilities would be wonderful. That's not in here because we probably, as a city, it's going to be difficult for us to attain, or as part of this project, it's going to be difficult to attain. But it's certainly something that we would all like to see and would still work after. It's just not a part of this plan. Doesn't mean it's not important. So, and there's other instances like that as well. So that's about it on kind of what the community wildfire protection plan is, and I guess what we can expect from it. And I think this is a great example of what a wildfire protection plan should be. And I think it gives us a good starting place and something we can do our due diligence on to try to complete as many of those projects in the action plan that we can. So the last little thing is we did receive some written communications. Thank you for that, for the emails. We're hoping that with what we go through here is going to address and answer a lot of your questions and hopefully ease some of your concerns is what we're hoping. We do have the chat feature available. You can type in questions and Sarah in the background is going to be looking at those. What we really ask you to do is please don't start sidebar conversations on the chat, because that just makes it really difficult for Sarah to follow those and it gets distracting. And then at the very end, if necessary, and I'm sure there will be folks that want to speak, we can open it up to speakers. We will be limited to 3 minutes on those. And that's what I have for now. Sarah or Susan, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think we are good to go.
No,
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. And I think at this point we can hand it over to Dave.
All right, good evening. My name is David Kerr, and I am a contractor for Jensen Hughes, who is the primary on the city of Malibu's wildlife or community wildfire protection plan. And just a little bit of background for me. I've worked 34 years in wildland fire management between the National Park Service and the United States Forest Service. Retired approximately 8 years ago from the Washington office of the U.S. Forest Service, where I was a wildland fire specialist, basically just working on special projects on a national basis. So since I've retired, I've done a little bit of consulting work, both with GeoElements and now with Jensen Hughes. So happy to be able to present this to you guys tonight, and hopefully we can clarify any issues and concerns that you might have concerning the project or the product that we've produced. So here we go. So when we first kicked this thing off, we had a kickoff meeting with the city, and one of the conversations that we had was the idea that we needed to provide a wildfire protection plan that actually was realistic and feasible, and that the recommended actions within the plan balance both ecological concerns, fiscal resources, and wildland fire hazard management. So those were a little bit of our marching orders from the city. And we also wanted to acknowledge the fact that we needed to provide the residents of Malibu kind of a one-stop shopping location for ideas concerning defensible space, structure hardening. How do we apply these things in both a way that addresses wildland fire hazard concerns, but also ecological concerns, and also the fiscal resources, because a lot of these activities that are in the recommendations sections are actually recommendations that are going to have to be initiated by the residents of Malibu. The city itself has very little land under its control, so it's going to be working in a facilitative manner with the residents to try to achieve the goals that are outlaid in this plan. So we came up at the public meetings that we had, we laid out the 5 primary goals of the CWPP. And the first, as almost in every plan, is to minimize wildland wildfire threat to life safety. So that's life safety for not only you, the residents of Malibu, but also the responders and that come to the next Woolsey fire, the next Old Topanga fire. So life safety protection was the first primary goal. Each one of these goals is then supported by a series of objectives that are laid out in the plan. And then those objectives are supported by the recommendations that are found in section 8 of the actual plan itself. Part of the effort that we did was to set priorities on how we mitigate risk. And it was a pretty simple, easy process for Malibu. When you look at the hazard assessment that we'll get to, obviously the Woolsey fire footprint now supports a much lower intensity wildland fire, or is modeled to support a lower intensity wildland fire than the eastern half of the community. So we've prioritized actions on the east side of the community, understanding that all those actions, we're going to go do work, or we're recommending doing work where work can be done. And that includes balancing the need to get CEQA done, or are there actions that can be done without actually dabbling into the world of environmental compliance, and that we can do these things on private land, or what can citizens do to work on their own private property to reduce this list. The last one I think is really important, and that's where section 8 comes through, is improve accountability, public trust, and efficiency of implementing these items. And we set up section 8, the recommendations, as almost a pull-out standalone section where the city will assign responsible officials for the items that they believe are important to get implemented, that have funding to get implemented. And through this tracking mechanism, hopefully the public can see how progress is being made and who the responsible officers are in the city for trying to make these things happen. And it may be county fire that is the responsible official on some of these. So working with Chief Smith with county fire, he's already provided us with a number of recommendations on who those responsible officials might be. The collaborative process is something that's required under the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. So that's part of the law that allows community wildfire protection plans to be developed and elevates these plans as far as the funding structure done. So we did 2 community workshops. Jerry talked about those. The community survey monkey was done with a total of 255 households responding to that. And then we outreach to various stakeholders in the local area and important community members that were identified to us at Jensen Hughes by the city itself. So we did talk to County Fire, obviously, MRCA, the Conservancy, State Parks, National Park Service, and the Resource Conservation District. Had personal interviews with members of staff on those, and then also met with several homeowners associations, fire safe councils, individuals that have particular knowledge in certain areas of the community, looking for items that they could share for us that we as outsiders might not know about the community itself. So it was difficult during COVID times to do the level of community outreach that we've traditionally done on other plans. It was much more impersonal, but I was able to get out on the ground with most of the community members and sit with them, especially in the Big Rock area, and talk to them about what their specific concerns were. As you go through the plan itself, part of the requirement is to do a hazard and risk assessment as part of a plan. Risk itself was done based on almost 100 years now of wildland fire history in Malibu. And the central core of Malibu, as identified by the brighter reds and oranges on the map, have basically a burn frequency of about 10 to 13 years on average. Those pieces of ground have burned that frequently. As you head out towards the east, the burn frequency is a little bit less. So we've categorized risk on a citywide basis based on how often does wildfire tend to visit a particular piece of ground in Malibu. And unfortunately, that core urban developed area of the city is the area that's visited most frequently by wildfire. The hazard assessment, we were able to use Dr. Crystal Colden up at UC Merced that took the vegetation and fuels layer from the pre-Woolsey conditions, pre-Woolsey fire conditions and the post-Woolsey fire conditions. And she edited those landscapes to reflect the changes that were associated with the Woolsey fire. So this particular map, this happens to show how post-Woolsey, the fire intensity on the western side of the community has been mitigated or lessened based on the impacts of having just burned recently 2 or 3 years ago, while the east side of the community still shows a much greater frequency or much greater modeled fire intensity than has happened in other places in the community. So this is part of how the priority setting was developed as this plan goes. Just at the east side of the community right now supports the most high intensity fires, and that's where the effort is, at least from this plan's perspective, is identified where work should be done. One of the elements of the request for proposal that came from the city was to take a look at the effects of climate change and how that might affect wildland fire. So again, Dr. Colden did the work on climatology for us, looking at areas of the South Coast. And basically, when you look at climate change and impacts on the environment, especially during the primary fall burning season, and that's the lower right-hand graphic there, you're seeing a decrease in fuel moistures during that critical fall burning period. And you're seeing an increase in the number of extreme wildfire days that are associated with that same fall burning period. So basically, we're looking at the climate warming and drying, the number of critical fire danger days increasing as we move into the 2020s and then even farther into the future. So basically, we can say things are not going to get better in Malibu, and we need to take actions now that allow us to prepare for the next upcoming wildfire. So when we take all that and we take a look at issues that the public brought to us, it was interesting to see certain elements that stood out as far as in the public survey. And of the 255 households that responded, 28% of them said that they still have single pane windows, which may or may not seem like a big deal to everyone, but single pane windows are much more easily compromised in a wildfire. And one of the structural hardening recommendations is that residences have dual pane windows. So it was interesting to see that of those that responded, still 28% of them had that single pane window. Of defensible space, which is the management of vegetation around the home ignition zone, that first 100 feet around a structure, 58% of the people said that they thought they'd had developed reasonable defensible space. But that tells me that 42% of the community of those that responded don't believe that they have acceptable defensible space. And to me, that's a really high number of the people that took the time to respond to a survey like this. Those are typically the people that are most concerned about wildfire, but even of those people, 42% of them said they had not developed sufficient defensible space at their property. And then things that we heard from both our individual meetings with people in the community and at the public workshops was this idea of defensible space inspection and enforcement. And that issue has been relayed to us that County Fire needs to step up the level of inspection and then also hold people accountable for doing the work that's required under Public Resource Code 4291 as far as hardening their structures against wildfire. So I think that was interesting that we heard this both at the public meetings, but it was also brought up by the community leaders that we spoke to. The idea of communications, 82% of the respondents thought they did not receive enough information to evacuate safety during the Woolsey fire. So how do we address that? How do we improve that information connection to the community? And stunningly, 6% of those that responded said they didn't receive any information on how to evacuate safely during the Woolsey fire. So those are things that kind of jumped out on that. And then lastly, the thing that came out of the public survey that I found interesting is that 40% of the respondents to this particular survey said that ecological values were as high a priority or should be given equal weight as protecting residences and structures during wildland fire work. So that tells me that there is a high level of ecological protective concern in the community and that those values are as important as the idea of protecting structures within the community itself. And then I thought on the flip side of that coin, typically when you have people that have strong ecological concerns, the use of herbicides is not supported very well, but more than 62% of the respondents said that they would be in favor of supporting the use of herbicides to control invasive species throughout the community. So those are two sides of the same ecological coin that we ended up digging up out of the public survey. Section 6 of the plan is basically just an overview of what are the existing programs within the community of Malibu. So you have several programs now that discuss preparedness for wildfires, how individuals can make their homes more resilient. There's existing programs both with undeveloped lots through the weed abatement program and around structures through Los Angeles County Brush Clearance Program. Those are existing things. There's an active CERT program in the city. You have an actively engaged City of Malibu Fire Safety Liaison available to the community. And the website's fairly well organized as far as where people can go to find information on preparedness if they choose to make that effort. The emergency notification system is one thing that struggles with the community. Cellular service in your canyons is difficult. You get in off of the main PCH area and cell signals drop off rapidly, but there are several existing notification systems that people can register to receive emergency notifications. So when you think back to those 6% of people who said they received no notification on evacuation during the Woolsey fire. Well, have they proactively registered on any of these sites that would allow them to receive information, or are they even aware of these? So the resources that are available to the community are summarized in the emergency notifications section of the CWPP. Structure hardening, there's 2 sections in the plan that discuss the need for structure hardening. And it's a topic in Malibu that's going to be critically important to long-term resiliency of the community. Since there's not a lot of land that can be manipulated from a fuel standpoint, the work that has to be done from the structure out. So Table 12 of the CWPP provides residents with a checklist of simple items that they can go through their own residence to see how they comply with current thinking on structure hardening, actions that they can take. CAL FIRE maintains a checklist that people can use for just simple low-cost actions that they can take that would increase the resiliency of their particular structure. And then for those that are interested in more detailed type of construction techniques to address fire resiliency, Chapter 7A of the Building Code has that title, or Chapter 49 of the LA County Code also addresses that. And interesting enough, currently the Insurance Commissioner, California Insurance Commissioner, and 4 other state agencies are working with insurance companies to try to incentivize home hardening actions through some sort of program that incentivizes that work through reduction in insurance rates. And that's going to be a very tough nut to crack. Insurance companies, especially in Northern California, are pulling out where they're allowed to pull out. The risk has been deemed too great for the financial rewards of insurance premiums. People up in Northern California are seeing 100, 200, 300% increases in their homeowner insurance rates, or they're being kicked off under the California Fair Plan for insurance. So this idea that at least the insurance commissioner is currently engaged with the companies to try to incentivize actions that if you do this work, you'll see some reduction in your premium. Where that goes, I think we need to see how that plays out at the state level. The idea of defensible space. I live on the Central Coast. I'm just up the coast from you in Ventura, Oxnard. And when I drive through Malibu, one thing that steps out at me is there's a lot of residences that have not established defensible space. I would say the proportion of the community is much higher than the 42% that responded in the public survey, saying that they don't have adequate defensible space at their particular residence. As you drive through most neighborhoods, it's easy to find homes that you would consider at risk due to lack of any sort of vegetation management, whether that's ornamentals, non-native species on their property. But this failure to address vegetation on private property creates an issue during a fire like the Woolsey fire, where much of the structure loss was driven by embercast and embercast moving in the community and igniting these flammable vegetation near and adjacent to structures. So to me, it's the biggest issue as far as things that need to get addressed in the particular community is how do we build good community defensible space, and how do neighbors work with neighbors on smaller lots to get this 100-foot of clearance that's required by the Public Resource Code. The code does not allow you to move on to other individuals' property. So how do you work with your neighbor, and how do 2 or 3 or 4 neighbors come together to build a more community level defensible space than what you could achieve just on a singular property? There's also an incredible number of non-native tree species throughout the community. There's invasive species, not only just invasive grasses, which are common throughout the community, but ornamental vegetation that's escaping from landscaping and is ending up in wildland vegetation. So you look at areas where fountain grass has colonized on roadsides, or you look at pampas grass that's in drainage bottoms. So there's a big issue with invasive species and the management of these ornamental species that are now moving into the wildland vegetation. So the new landscaping ordinance of the city will certainly help. An assembly bill that just came into effect in January requiring a 5-foot ember resistant zone adjacent to structures will certainly help. But the idea of getting out there, looking at your property and seeing what can be done on a personal level to make your home more resilient is critically important to the fire resiliency of Malibu. The vegetation management activities, when we talk about that, we needed to prioritize as part of a requirement of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. And we talked about how we're doing that, the east side of the community versus the west side of the community. Priority locations outside of the Wildfire, but we've also divided up the community into zones and also have a set of actions or recommendations that can be applied on a community-wide basis. So whether you're in a priority location or not, you as an individual property owner have the ability to take actions on your private land that would help with fire resiliency. And then from Jensen Hughes' standpoint, when we prioritize the types of treatments, the idea of developing this community defensible space where 1 or 2 or 3 or multiple residences come together to address the defensible space issue would be our highest priority. Roadsides and right-of-ways in order to maintain safer evacuation routes and to stop the encroachment of vegetation onto the road prism itself, just to make driving itself safer if people need to evacuate during a fire situation. The removal or the maintenance of non-native tree species, particularly in that 100-foot, 200-foot home ignition zones, would be our 3rd level of priority for to be addressed. And then there's only a singular linear fuels treatment that is part of the recommendation actions, and that's up above Upper Big Rock that attaches Upper Big Rock into Rambla Pacifica area. It's an existing fire line off of Woolsey that's immediately adjacent to the structures there that could be worked on. But those linear fuel break types of treatments, certainly at a landscape level, none of those are recommended in there. And this is a singular linear feature that we deem to be probably the lowest priority of any of the vegetation management actions in the plan itself. So we tried to collect a bunch of information about what was going on currently in the city, and there's very little information available, either from Los Angeles County Forestry, the fire department, or inside the city. We were able to acquire some information from the local homeowners associations, fire safe councils, as far as what they've been doing, things that we just noticed on the ground, but building this database of existing actions so that the city understands what's happening on the ground, and can look at items like maintenance. How often should we do maintenance on these existing treatment priorities, and what can the city do to help citizens groups facilitate these types of fuels treatment? So there's very few actions that could actually be identified within the city boundary. Our proposal actions, I believe we came up with approximately 671 acres that should be evaluated for some sort of vegetation management treatment. And it may simply be the removal of non-native species or the maintenance of non-native tree species within certain areas. So some would be management of a eucalyptus grove. Some might be treatments of invasive species of grasses that are working on roadside. Some of these treatments might be simply maintaining either native or ornamental vegetations that's encroaching on road prisms. So there is spatially several treatments that have been identified. The type of treatment is spelled out as far as what our recommended action would be, but we understand that anything that involves the treatment of vegetation outside of personal property would require some sort of CEQA level analysis. Obviously, guidelines inside of your coastal implementation plan would have to be addressed. So these are simply recommendations and areas that the city could look at doing, and most of this work would be a facilitation effort between the private property owners or the primary landowner in these particular units. These are not city lots, or these are not city-owned properties, so the city has no direct jurisdictional authority over these areas. Evacuation planning in section 6, we saw it in the Woolsey Fire after action review. There is an existing evacuation plan for the city. How well that's communicated to the residents there is probably another question that needs to be addressed, and understanding on how the evacuation plan is developed. So the existing plan works on the idea of zones, and we're going to be evacuating zones as fire progression is monitored. But do the residents of Malibu actually understand the zoning concept? So how do we communicate effectively with the residents of Malibu regarding evacuations? How do we deal with the other jurisdictional agencies that affect the ability to exit the Malibu area? We have one basically east-west running primary evacuation route. So how do we manage traffic flow on that? What type of exercises can be done with cooperating agencies to assure that the next time we need to get a large number of residences out of Malibu, that we're able to do it in a more efficient manner than what potentially happened during the Woolsey fire? And then does the community understand that there are currently identified safe refuge areas within the city? And has a capacity analysis been done on these safe refuge areas? So if we've identified them, how many people can we actually use with that? And are there options for enhancing these safe refuge areas? Our plan is organized based on existing Los Angeles County Fire Department, they call them structural defense tactical maps. So the entire community of Malibu has been designed up in the zones, and LA County has tactical structure defense maps that are associated with them. So we took those existing maps, we grouped them into a Western, Central, and Eastern format when we organized the recommendations. And then we have a citywide set of recommendations that could be applied that are applicable to anywhere in the community. So in total, there's 67 recommendations. We understand that not all these are going to be viable, that funding is going to be limitations, environmental compliance is going to be a limitation, the willingness of property owners is going to be a limitation. But the ability to have a list of projects that you can go to and say, well, this is how we see the priorities of the city shaking out, and this is where we're going to put our effort and our energy and our funding as it's available to do this work. So there is a list of projects that are available, and based on either staffing, money, or environmental issues, any of those projects could be implemented to provide a more resilient fire community here for Malibu. So this is how community wildfire actions are identified at the Malibu level or the community-wide basis. It may be as simple as working with LA County Fire to develop a surge inspection program where we start to develop more face-to-face interaction between the fire department and the residents as far as developing defensible space. Or we may take a look at working with the jurisdictional road edge agencies, Caltrans, road departments, the city itself. How do we manage the encroachment of vegetation onto our existing road prisms? Are there things that can be done within the city itself to incentivize property owners to harden their structures? Is there either cost sharing that can be done through grants or insurance incentive that can be worked out with insurance companies? So any of these items that are found in the community-wide basis are applicable anywhere in the city of Malibu. And then each one of the geographic areas is divided up into specific actions. So as an example, the Western Malibu, or WM6, talks about work that could be done between La Hernan and Lunita roads to improve defensible space. And it focuses primarily on the north-south running drives that are in that particular area and the lack of access into the structures there. So each zone inside of Malibu has, I believe, up to 11 separate action items that are defined geographically, which could be considered and analyzed as far as, can it be done feasibly? Can it be done without negative environmental impacts? Is funding available to carry these projects out? But but some of them are very simple, like a chipper program for the Las Flores Mesa area. And this would be a pilot program where we see, is there a community interest? If the city provides a chipper, will people do the work and bring their cut material out to the road for disposal? But that doesn't exist in the city currently. So perhaps there's time to run a pilot program to see if we offer this service, will people actually use it? So each one of the geographic areas of the city has a series of recommendations that are associated with it. So basically that's the organization of the plan. Some of the things that we noticed when we were working with the community itself is Malibu is always going to have an elevated level of fire risk based on just weather patterns and fuels, the way that the topography is oriented. Wildfire will visit Malibu again. It's pretty much just a matter of when. And climate change is only going to exacerbate the type of fire severity and possibly the fire frequency on the ground. When you look at the primary land management agencies that surround Malibu, most of them don't have the mission of reducing fire flammability or vegetation management. That's not what they are organized to do. That's not what their originating documents allow them to do. State Parks is not interested in doing large-scale vegetation management projects. The National Park Service is not interested in doing large-scale vegetation management projects. And we have to kind of accept that they have a different mission than simply providing fire protection for the community of Malibu. So we have to kind of embrace the fact that they're on a different mission track than some folks in Malibu would like them to be. The ability to develop a more fire-resistant community truly resides with the residents of Malibu. So much can be done through structure hardening. So much can be done through development of more quality defensible space, that individual actions on individual private property is going to be a key for hardening Malibu. The codes exist within the community. They exist at the county level to enforce these actions. The community just needs to embrace these actions and take them on and understand that the city's not going to be able to ride to the rescue on every concern. The money's not there, the jurisdictional authority is not there, and personal responsibility is really going to be key to carrying these things out. And then there are community organizations that exist between homeowners associations, fire safe councils, Big Rock Street teams. These organizations exist that can help the facility or can help facilitate these actions for the city. So coming together with a homeowners association and Horizon Hill to address their particular concerns. Does Horizon Hill's HOA have funding available that would allow them to accomplish, the idea of developing community defensible space? And then how can the city help facilitate those types of actions that the private citizens can take? And those are going to be the key features that are going to make Malibu a safer place. It's a very complex plan. There's lots of actions identified. There's no way that 67 proposed actions are going to get accomplished within a 5-year period. So picking and choosing what's most important and what's most feasible for the community is what I'd like to leave you guys with tonight. And hopefully our work meets some of the needs that the city has identified and meets some of your concerns as the citizens of Malibu. And that should be it for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
So we are going to go to the question phase. I see people have typed in things to the chat. We are collecting comments and we will be sending those on to Jensen Hughes and the fire safety, Jerry, our fire safety specialist later. However, it seems like the majority of the initial comments were comments, not necessarily questions. Please be specific with your questions if you have a question, or you can type in the chat that you would like to speak.
Hey, I'd just like to say real quick, there were a lot of comments from Antoine. Antoine, thank you very much. Antoine is responsible for putting together the new website that we have listed on our wildfire safety page. It's defensiblespace.org. And it's a really, really, really good resource. And he's pointed out a couple of things that we could insert or change out some pictures and diagrams and stuff to kind of clean up this plan a little bit. So Antoine, thank you very much for those recommendations. We'll be going through those. And again, everybody that's here, I would encourage you to go to that site, defensiblespace.org, because there's just really a lot of good information on there, from, you know, good fire resistant plants and landscaping and home hardening techniques and ideas, and just all kinds of great stuff on there. So Antoine, thank you for that. Judy, you did type on there. I don't have your list of questions. Some of it I know we tried to address on our comments, and some I think that was talked about in here. And I think if you can type at least one of those for me, we can address that. And then if not, we can do that through through speaking. So I know you had concerns with, is it Halsey? Dr. Halsey?
I mean, Judy, maybe if she wants to speak, it might be easier. Judy, if you want to
Okay.
speak, just indicate that you'd like to speak, and then you would be first up, and then after that would be Ryan.
Okay.
After that would be Ryan and then Scott Dietrich. I realized that nobody could hear me because I was muted when I was talking.
Okay,
All
so
right.
we are going to be limited to 3 minutes. So
All right, Judy, you are being asked to unmute. Please do so.
Okay,
Um,
I'm
and
unmuted.
Dave, I think this will be a question for you.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you okay, Judy. Go ahead.
I think my major concern underlying this entire plan is that, to me, it lacks incorporating the science of many people. The expert you were asking about is Rick Halsey, who is from the Chaparral Institute. And that science shows that destroying chaparral and going more than 100 feet of defensible space around homes actually doesn't work. And home hardening is the critical thing. So what I see in this plan is, you say that there are no specific recommendations in Chapter 8 to do major vegetation plans and prescribed burns. But when you read through the plan, the tone of it is that all of those things and even pesticide use are included. And to me, that just lacks, incorporation of the science that is out there and preserving our native habitat. Chaparral is not an evil thing, and it does not cause wildfires. And I think there's, people have a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of anxiety, understandably, after the Woolsey fire. But it is not the chaparral. We have wind-driven fires that are driven by embers, as you spoke about. Those blew over the 10-lane 101 freeway, which tells you right there that removing vegetation and putting in brakes does not work. So I would like to know what experts in native plants, chaparral, and wildfire had input on this plan. I don't see any. And can you engage such experts such as Rick Halsey? He would be more than willing. I spoke with him to give a presentation to the people working on this plan and the city council to educate you on which I think you need. And I think the community could really help to hear these things. So can you say, are there any such experts that have ever been consulted and are going to be consulted?
Sorry, David.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
thank
can
you.
say, we've used Dr. Crystal Colton. She's an assistant professor, and her title is very strange, in the management of complex systems at UC Merced. And she and Rick Halsey are associates and know each other well. So we use Crystal not only for the analysis for climate, but she also provided the input into fire history, fire risk. She did the ember zone analysis that's in the plan, and she also addressed some of the fire ecology elements that are in the plan. But if there's a perception that the plan is addressing the removal of native chaparral and wants to encourage the removal of native chaparral. That's an incorrect perception. The focus is on non-native species, work inside the home existing zones, work along primary travel routes, which would be management of vegetation within 10 feet of the shoulders of the road, and then structure hardening. So the only linear feature that would be potentially in native chaparral is the one short existing fire break between Upper Big Rock and Ramble Pacifica that is existing off of the Woolsey fire.
So I would say as well, in regards to the defensible space, whether it's 100 feet or 200 feet, that still lies in the hands of LA County Fire Department in their defensible space program. So it is 100 feet, and then under certain conditions where they deem it necessary, if a house is sitting on top of a ridge, you know, or just has excessive growth around it, then they have the right to, you know, require more clearance than that. But as part of this plan and as part of the city, we don't have any plans to do any more chaparral removal or mitigation than needs to be done. Does that help, Judy? Are you still on?
I think I muted her again.
Okay.
So she still has a minute remaining. So,
Okay, can you hear me?
yep, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I don't know Crystal Polden, I don't know her credentials, but I do think that I would really like to see the tone of this plan. I mean, there's a lot of us that reacted to it this way. So the tone of this plan is again, it's such that it is, you know, including pesticides and including, you know, fire breaks. And you know, it just, like some of the diagrams show homes with forest trees around them, which is obviously not even relevant to Malibu. So to me, it just doesn't really reflect our ecosystem well. And I would really like to know if we could have, one person is probably not going to be enough. Like, as you go forward, are you going to have, you know, really intimate involvement of a native plant, you know, wildfire ecology expert within that? Because I don't see it when I read your plan. I don't see that. Many others read it and felt the same
Well,
way.
when you look at the action plan right now, I mean, most of it, as we just went through, most of it addresses non-native and ornamental vegetation and roadside, and with the exception of the already existing fire break, and I think one little treatment area off of Paseo Canyon, most of it revolves around that. So,
Yeah, but it comes on a context of the whole plan, and that's what I'm saying. I'd like to see more of the
Judy,
science
that's your
in-
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
thank you, Judy.
Next is Ryan. 1 second, Ryan, I'm asking you to unmute.
Thank you. I want to say that there's so much that is new and so much that is not new about this report and the unique Malibu environment on how it repeatedly burns. This is, as I said, I started this in 1992 on the city's Emergency Preparedness Task Force, and we identified a lot of things in February before the fire of '93. And the basics are really of fire mitigation are the brush clearance and fuel modification. Beyond that, we can do some of these fire-wise landscaping with the new codes and so forth for new rebuilds and remodels. But identifying these unique neighborhood risks, the vulnerabilities, and the potential mitigations that are unique to those areas and ranking them for feasibility. Not necessarily the economic feasibility, but how quickly can these be implemented? Can they be carried out in a year or 2 or 3 in a cohesive plan? I also want to comment on the issues of communications because they were glossed over. That was a really big deal, whether or not anybody was able to communicate, because we have effective psychological well-being issues when people cannot communicate, they get stressed out. the scenarios change, people start thinking the worst things can happen, and they're not as useful that if they can and be on board. So the communications may need to occur in advance, and that is emergency preparedness planning with a to-do list, a chart, those things that were, well, we even came out with one in 1993. So the communications is a whole nother aspect, and I think I've said it before, but the city needs to reactivate a telecommunications commission so that you can fast track hardening of the communications network, inventorying it, rating it, ranking it, testing it in Malibu for the 3 different carriers now that are operating 4 different systems. And as was the decision over the hill, the city of Calabasas chose to elevate the status of their telecommunications commissioners to do hearings for telecommunications projects and changes to comply with the shot clock rule. And they only hear, as a planning commission, they only hear the items of telecommunications towers. Because as we've heard, the planning commissioners really aren't apprised and familiar with the telecommunications networks and the issues, redundancies, and vulnerabilities in that arena. So those would be my comments on how the city could improve communications.
Ryan, that's your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay.
Do we have anyone else? Sarah, you there?
Scott Dietrich.
Yes,
Ah,
Scott,
thank you.
Hi,
go ahead.
Hi,
and
Scott.
thank you, David, Jerry, Susan. Hi, Chris. We, in our association in Rambla Pacifico, offered our members a $250 discount a year ago, almost 2 years ago, if they get their home inspected for hardening. 30% of them took advantage of that. And I think in the city, we might be up around 10%, which is really sad. So I keep asking myself and everybody else, because I don't have a good answer, how we can get a lot more people to participate in this. I don't know if we can legislate that from the council, but one idea that I did have, and I'm asking you guys if it's feasible. When the fire department comes around every May or whenever they come and does your so-called brush inspection, if they could leave a note on your gate in the mailbox saying, you know, you can get a more thorough home hardening inspection, that might work, because what we found, in spite of all the communication we've done and the city had done, is a lot of people, oh no, I got my, home inspected, the fire department came by, not realizing there was a differential between the two. So that's just one idea. Another question, I know the CHP has not been super cooperative when we're trying to open a 3rd lane on PCH, and especially in Eastern Malibu, if there's a fire here, everybody's going to try to go to Santa Monica. We tell everybody go west if that's the case, but they're going to go towards Santa Monica. Are we getting anywhere with that? So there's a question. And last, Judy's right that, if you do brush mitigation through prescribed burns, you're not going to stop the fires. But what you are going to do is reduce the fuel load substantially, maybe give the firefighters a chance, and certainly be able to stop the wholesale killing of all the animals during a brush fire. And so just the Chaparral Institute keeps relying on these couple scientists. Well, there's a lot more people that have experience with fires that say, yeah, you need to control this and not just let it grow and grow and grow and get out of hand. But I see, as I drive around, just like what David said, is there's a lot of people, they haven't done anything in terms of brush, foliage mitigation, defensible space, and
Scott,
hardening? How do we get it? How do we
Scott?
move it forward? Thank you.
that's your time. Thank you.
Scott, just a couple comments for you. You know, one, this plan does point out that because of the lack of ability, none of these mitigations really occur on city property, and a lot of it is community based, and it's people having to engage and work on their own properties. And how we do that and continue to do that is, you know, that is a question. So in regards to the home hardening and the first 5 feet, the fire resistant first 5 feet, there is that AB 3074 that was signed into law. It was signed by the governor late last year and then went into effect January 2021. However, there's a lot of logistics that need to be worked out on that. So CAL FIRE is putting together a group for that, and I believe they have until January 2023 to put that into effect. But that puts in the hands of the local authority having jurisdiction, which for us would be the LA County Fire Department. They would have to be conducting some kind of an inspection in regards to the fire resistant first 5 feet. So I can tell you in the work that I've done, I visited 266 homes, but I have no enforcement authority. I do leave a list of recommendations. I don't have the authority to do follow-up or enforce any of that. Some people have taken my recommendations and built upon that and have done an outstanding job. I think some people do a little, and there may be some that do none of it. So it's going to be a heavy lift to enforce that, because it could be, you know, right now I tell people, you know, a wood trellis with a wisteria growing all over it attached to your house isn't a good idea. And they basically tell me, yeah, that's nice, it's staying. There's nothing I can do. But with this new AB 3074, that may have to go. I don't know. So it's going to be a heavy lift to try to enforce that, but that is coming up. So hopefully that'll help. In the meantime, we'll still be doing our program voluntarily. So thanks for your comment, Scott.
Next speaker we have is Georgia Goldfarb. Georgia, you're being asked to unmute.
Did it work this time?
Yes, go
Can you
ahead.
hear me now? Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank
go ahead.
I just have a couple of points. One is I really wish you hadn't asked us for questions if you weren't going to somehow address them, because I spent quite a bit of time looking through that. And so I would like you to consider a way that you could respond to the questions, maybe not in this forum, but to put the answers out there, because there's some very serious questions about this document in my mind. And I only got partway through it because this was the other issue. There was no time to review it. 3 days is not sufficient time to review 175 pages, in my opinion. I wanted to comment about the expert that you referenced. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name. You said she was a colleague or something of Rick Halsey. The thing was, as I recall, she addressed specific climate issues and another couple of issues that you mentioned, but not the overall tone of the document or the recommendations that would be included from the House outward. So to me, that was, yes, I'm glad you got that information, but that was not, I think, what most of the environmentally conscious residents had in mind for a collaboration. And then that kind of gets to the overall tone of the document when you say that, you know, we're not going to have, well, we didn't really mean prescribed fire or, you know, clearing of the habitat or whatever. We just meant invasives, but that really was not clear. It was, the tone of it was, we're going to do this. Well, I don't think you're going to be doing any prescribed burns. And I think that the evidence shows that removing native habitat is extremely ill-advised. It just leads to more problems, type conversion, and you know, and then that means non-native grasses, which are incredibly flammable, and an ongoing removal program. Thank
Okay, Georgia, I don't know if you were here at the beginning. We did acknowledge and we regret that there was such a short period for folks to review this plan. We are leaving it open until April 9th for further review and questions. Just the issue was our performance period of the grant expires on Monday, the 15th. So we wanted to just get this out there when we could.
Yeah, and I think I want to add, Georgia, yeah, we got a lot of questions and it was difficult to try to answer all the questions before the meeting. So I think we can probably compile all the questions and it can be like a frequent or an FAQ and have that as something that's documented and we'll get answers to all the questions for everybody to see.
We have a question from Antonin. Could you please explain the use of the origin upwards of 200 to 300 feet of clearance on page 111, community defensible space? It seems to be in contradiction with the title. I'm assuming page 32 hyphen section 325.2.2 extra hazard, mentioning that the clearance should not exceed 200 feet.
David, do you have any information on that? Sorry.
I believe what he's referring to, and I don't have the document open in front of me, but I think that's the community defensible space section, where if you have two property owners come together, or two or three or multiple come together that each do defensible space work within their zone of 100 feet or as required by the fire official farther, then those properties interconnecting therefore increase the overall defensible space up to that greater distance that may be 200 or 300 feet. I would have to pop the document open to that particular page to see if that's what that diagram is referring to, but that's what I am guessing it refers to.
Just real quick, I'm looking at it and it says the combination of topography and vegetation can often make it difficult to protect structures with only 100 feet of clearance. Depending on site-specific conditions, upwards of 200 to 300 feet of clearance may be needed to adequately protect homes from a wildfire. So I'm thinking of something on a ridge top, in a saddle or something like that. So, and just to be clear, and we can change that to 200 feet, the 300 feet can come out of here because with the LA County ordinance, it's standard 100 and it's 200 if they deem it to be, necessary depending on, conditions. So.
And if that's the safe separation distance section, Jerry, that's based on firefighter workability in order to engage a wildfire in that particular area. That's what a safe separation distance would require for firefighters to safely engage. That doesn't have to do directly with defensible space itself. But when you look at potential heat impact on the firefighters working in a particular area, there is a safe separation distance to prevent thermal injury, and that's what that relates to.
Okay, so again, that the defensible space that is administered by LA County Fire, and if they're saying it's 100 feet standard and 200 feet by special consideration, then that's what it is. So. We're not advocating 300 feet or over 200 feet, so.
Our next speaker is Joe Drummond.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with the chaparral protection, even in Big Rock where I live. And I agree with page 47. I didn't get through the whole report, but I got at least to 88 pages. I agree with page 47, removal of non-native species and establishment of native California oaks could promote both visual quality and fire resilience in the local community. Have you or are you considering hiring flame mappers to plan wildfire mitigation measures for residential communities around the city? They have plans to remove non-native vegetation and plant live oaks to block active fire paths in the communities. Do you want to answer that before I go to another question? Or?
This is Jerry. To the best of my knowledge, we don't have a plan to hire flame mapper yet. I don't know that they've made a proposal to us on that, but again, I think, the importance of having a plan like this in place, the CWPP, it does open that, hopefully the funding mechanism, because, if that's something we want to do and we have the CWPP in place, it just kind of legitimizes your request and hopefully paves the way a little smoother to get that funding. So, but that's something we'll certainly look at, I'm sure.
Okay, that's great.
Joe, I'm
Um,
sorry, I missed part of that question. What was your question about Flame Mapper? I might be able to answer that.
Oh, I'm just what they have plans. They create plans to remove non-native vegetation and plant live oaks to block active fire paths. in
Okay.
Communities. So I was
Okay.
wondering if anyone has approached them or if they've approached the city. I thought they were doing work for the city.
They are, and we do have them on contract, but for doing fire modeling for live fire events.
Oh, okay. And then I noticed something that said that there's pipelines, natural gas distribution pipelines pass north of the city through the Santa Monica Mountains. Both pipelines are subsurface and not considered a risk from wildfire. I know in Big Rock, our gas pipelines are above the ground in Big Rock. Are we at risk for these catching fires or exploding or anything like that?
Your gas pipelines are above ground too. I know sometimes they do go up the hill, but so,
Behind
probably,
my house.
pardon me?
Behind my house, yeah.
Okay. So it would really take a lot of prolonged heat to, compromise those pipes. I mean, a lot of long prolonged heat to compromise those. So, it's good to keep them clear or at least thinned out as much as you can. Same with propane tanks. It takes a long time of prolonged heat, to make those fail. So keeping them clear around and as thinned out as you can certainly helps a lot for that. But I don't think that's an immediate threat now.
Okay, and then you said with the evacuation, transportation and the movement of individuals to safety ahead of a wildfire is a great challenge for the city, county, and state governments. State Route 1, PCH, is the principal evacuation route for residents of Malibu and provides east-west egress in the event of a wildfire. Unfortunately, eastbound travel on PCH into the West Los Angeles has limited capacity and resulted in significant congestion during wildfires. We need to have all lanes going one way during an evacuation and traffic moving smoothly with police there to direct traffic at intersections. Is this going to happen?
Susan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. We've been through that with our law enforcement partners because they're really the one managing that. And it's, the sheriff and LAPD and Santa Monica and everybody. And what they really found is that it takes too long to do a full contraflow. That's when you have all the lanes go in the same direction. Because, well, I mean, they tried to do it during Woolsey and it just took a really long time to get that in place. And by the time they did, it was practically, I don't want to say too late, but it was pretty far into the evacuation. They feel like it's just better to use other methods to relieve the traffic congestion, including maybe temporary safe refuge areas, so that, I mean, the whole goal is to get everybody out of the danger zone as quickly as possible. And then the next goal would be to get them to whatever their destination is, whether it's a shelter or a friend's house or a family's house. But, priority number one is getting them out of the danger zone. So that's why we've been looking at temporary safe refuge areas where you can, fill up parking lots that are safe if you need to, just so you can get the back of the line out of the danger area more quickly. And that seems like it might be faster than trying to set up a contraflow, especially down at that end of town. So that's basically where we're sitting with them, that they believe it's going to be more effective to handle it in other ways.
Okay, and alternative methods of communication will need to be evaluated for wildfire risk mitigation actions and public notification during wildfires. We had no electricity and no cell phone service, so it was almost impossible to get any information from the city during Woolsey. Is this new siren and all of that new program going to help us with this?
It will assist, but it's, again, when it comes to communication, especially when power is out, that's a tricky one. And we're just trying to fill our, so to speak, toolkit with different things we can use. The siren, if you've seen the siren study, it will be effective for some people, but some people may not be able to hear the siren. What's going to be really critical is working with our broadcast radio partners such as KBOO and Hans, and we have a very good relationship with Hans, and he's going to be speaking next. I think he's up next. Because that's really the key with the siren, that if you alert people, that doesn't tell them anything. And to get information, broadcast radio is probably the best, because you can even just jump in your car and turn on your radio to get information. And so that's what we're working on.
Oh, can that information be sent to all residents? With that?
Yeah, I mean,
Broadcast.
we talk about it a lot, but we will continue to promote that idea.
Okay, and then my last point or question is a high percentage of existing building stock with deficient structural hardening. The city of Malibu's topography and past development practices impedes access and egress for emergency services and efficient evacuation of residents, tourists, and other visitors. Yet later it states in the report, these land use designations are intended to preserve the existing rural, predominantly single-family residential character of the community, protect natural resources, and minimize overburdening of local infrastructure, while also allowing for reasonable residential and commercial development where within the local geological.
Joe, that's
Yeah.
your 3 minutes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, the next person we have is Hans. Give me 1 second. I need to make sure I unmute the correct account. Hans, go ahead and try.
Hi there.
Oh,
Oh, got it. I got it fixed. I'm recording on one. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. Look, there's some interesting stuff going on in the chat. I want to make it real clear. I don't know of anyone who's saying wholesale clearing of chaparral is a good idea in the Santa Monica Mountains. But clearing brush, clearing the chaparral brush within 200 feet of houses saved my neighborhood. And all you have to look at is the adjacent neighborhood in Trancas, where the fire break ends halfway up the canyon on the east side of Paseo Canyon. And down here at the south end, where we have a nice 200-foot buffer into the chaparral, we were able to save all but 2 houses. And those 2 houses caught fire because they had trees over them that should have been cut down. But beyond there, further up the canyon, where the chaparral came right into people's backyards, that's where the dozen houses burned down. So Rick Halsey talks a good game and he sells a lot of books and he goes on a lot of tours. But when you talk to county fire or any other wildlife people and the name Rick Halsey comes up, you get this knowing nod like, oh yeah, him. And he makes a lot of good points. I've read one of his books. I've interviewed him for the Malibu Times years ago. He's a smart guy, but the fact of the matter is there are places in Malibu where chaparral needs to be removed. And no blanket approach works anywhere in these mountains. And you cannot say remove all the chaparral, but you can't also say don't remove the chaparral. Now that's my opinion as a guy who was able to help save Surfside Way with 22 houses on it, because I went out and personally hand cleared chaparral 250 feet out. And I did it for exercise instead of going to the gym, and I'm going to be out there doing it again this spring. Is there going to be a new communications plan to replace section 6.2 in this, Susan? I sent you a note about the failings in there. Is this designed to be the be all and the end all on communications?
Not at all. In fact, this plan, communications is brought up very lightly here. Communications plans will be in our emergency plan, because this is not an emergency plan. So what you sent me, all of that will be something that we can fold into our emergency plan.
Okay, but if this CWPP is out there for people to look at, like you just heard the person a couple things ahead say, they didn't know about the great relationship we have with KBOO radio in the city. And I would suggest that section 6.2 needs to be out and the stuff about Antelope Valley radio stations removed, and a little bit more about how the sirens will interface with KBOO radio, we hope, although I realize it's still under.
Right. It's a little premature. So, I mean, they had, to be honest with you, I didn't have a lot of time to look at this either. And, you know, once I got your email with your concern on that, I did recall that I saw that, but long story. But anyways, the sirens, they had listed it and I had them pull it out because it's too premature. We need to wait until we actually have sirens before we start talking about the sirens, I think.
Okay, but in the meantime, we could do a better job, put a paragraph
Yeah.
in there
No,
describing where we
I
are now.
agree. And that's it. That's an easy fix. But in terms of like the full detail of communications, that would go into our emergency plan and doesn't need to be in this plan, because this is more about, it's not an emergency plan. It's just to look at how to reduce fire hazard in the urban wildfire intersection there.
I look forward to working with you on that.
Yeah.
And thank you for your help so far. It's been
Yeah.
a good relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Hey, I would just say too that, you know, keep in mind that this CWPP, it supplements or adds to whatever projects and other emergency plans and everything else the city already has. It's not replacing everything, it's a supplement too. And again, it's just kind of giving us some guidance and some mitigation projects that we can look at and fully vet out before we do them, you know, again, so it's not replacing anything, it's just a supplement too.
Okay, our next speaker is Antoine Kush. Kunch? I'm sorry, I probably butchered your name. I apologize.
It's all right. It's Antoine Kunch. Thank you, Jerry. And
Hi, Antoine.
Hi, thank you for working on this document. I think it's a very important document for the community to have. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to make a quick comment to clarify the question I had earlier about the community defensible space section on page 111, where it is mentioned that depending on site-specific conditions, upward of 200 to 300 feet of clearance may be needed. And I saw something similar on page 93 in the safe separation distance section. I want to make sure that I understand that clearly, because when you look at, so Title 32, which is the fire code, it clearly said that even for extra hazard zones, the defensible space can be extended from 100 feet up to 200 feet, but not to exceed 200 feet. So I just want to make sure that the plan is not recommended to do vegetation clearance beyond the 200 feet that can be required by the fire departments.
So no, again, all of that defensible space program, that's the fire department's program, and it's up to them to work with the homeowners. I know the minimum required is 100, and then if they're on a ridge, if they're in a saddle, if there's heavy fuels around them, then they have the ability to extend that to 200 feet. But we have no plans to extend that. And then I think the earlier one, it was the safe separation distance, and that's just, that refers to the ability of firefighters to be in the area to work, and that's where that greater up to 300 feet, because that the 200 feet may take into account that it's going to provide some safe defensible space for the home, but not provide an environment for firefighters to work in that environment, and that's where that extra, the 300 feet comes. But I don't see that as being the city's, you know, job or responsibility to do that. That'd be a fire department function. And if they're saying 100 standard and 200, if they deem necessary based on conditions, then that's what it's going to be. Does that help? I hope. I see you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. That helps. Yeah, I mean, the defensible space distance are really being looked at. And I know you mentioned the 100 feet of clearance that is required by CAL FIRE, but the 200 feet should already include the safe distance for firefighters. But thank you for that answer. Yeah.
Thank you, Antoine.
All right. It looks like what has been going on in the chat is mostly discussion. As a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. If you would like to speak, please let us know through the chat. We'll give it a few minutes and then see if anybody has any more questions.
So hopefully there's other folks that want to speak. If not, I would just like to say, thanks for your input. Again, this is going to be open until April 9th, so that you will have more time, for your input. We can do some, small modifications and some edits on here. I don't see that it's going to change drastically. And again, it comes down to the mitigation plan, the action plan that we have. And I think that Jensen Hughes and David and the consultants did a really good job of keeping in mind our environmental concerns. I don't see, the tone that folks are talking about that is advocating, clear cutting of chaparral. That's just not going to happen. We understand that's not going to happen, and we certainly are not advocating that. And the meat and potatoes of it is that the action plan and those mitigation recommendations that are there. And, again, for the most part, those are looking at the invasive species and non-native, road clearance. And again, even those things, we may not be able to accomplish all of them. We have, in a lot of cases, we have to line up multiple property owners that want to agree to do it. So agree to do some of these mitigations, and that may or may not happen. So I just see this as a document where we go through all of these recommendations, and we, make our best faith effort to go through them, to investigate them, go through the process that we need. Hopefully we can line some of these up. Hopefully we can apply for some grants and get some of it paid for. And again, continue to focus on the structure hardening, maybe incentivize that a little bit, maybe get some money to help with some mitigation on that. So that's really what this plan is about. It's not about trying to, again, do any clear cutting and a lot of chaparral management. So I just want to emphasize that. So Sarah, do we have anyone else?
We do. We have another
Great.
question from Ms. Drummond. What effect does the added development have on wildfires for both evacuations and added structures to burn?
Hey, you ready?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. What effect does added development have on wildfires, both for evacuations and added structures to burn?
So I would say that it could definitely, put further stress on the ability to get people out, and, especially depending on where this new development can be. I know there's not a whole lot of development going on, and certainly no, real dense development. So the good thing is, with all the regulations that are in effect, and stuff like our fire resistant landscape ordinance that the city has put forth, and then just, building regulations, the homes are going to be made more fire resistive, probably no eaves, dual pane windows, fire resistive vents, no wood attachments such as decks and trellises. And then you couple that with the fire resistive landscape ordinance with the clean first 5 feet around the house, and then lighter vegetation in the next 30 feet. And then, can get a little heavier from there, not planting palm trees, and a lot of no eucalyptus trees and stuff like that. So that's all going to help. And even with the rebuilds, when you see a lot of the rebuilds, it's just with the new building codes, the homes are much more fire resistant. So that part I don't think is going to be as much of an issue as adding, the people and putting a heavier burden on the roads and trying to get people out. Susan, you have anything to add on that?
No, I think just in terms, I just want to add, I mean, her question has more to do with development, more planning questions than for us, but getting back to the the plan going forward, just so everybody knows that this is not going to be a plan that we just stick on the shelf. It will be something that we will be, taking off the things in the action plan. I don't know how many of you know, but Jerry here is actually leaving us. And we've done a recruitment, and we found a replacement, offered the position today, and that individual, Jerry, will stay on to bring him up to speed. And one of his big responsibilities will be taking the plan forward to get it approved by the city council. And then once that's done, looking at the action items, and then probably, we'll have to identify, kind of a work plan and prioritize those. And that will be part of that individual's job, our new fire safety liaison. So this is going to be a plan that will be worked on. But again, like Jerry said, some of these items, as we really look at them, some of them maybe won't work and won't be appropriate. And so all plans are actually like live documents. You can make updates to them as you go along. In fact, in the very beginning of the plan, you can see there's a page where you do record your updates and changes so that everyone knows what was changed in the plan. So definitely things that turn out to be something that's not going to work will be removed, and we will reflect that there. So that's all I wanted to say.
We have another question from Ms. Goldfarb. Are you going to advocate for subsidies to homeowners who can't afford house hardening?
I've thought about that, and I don't control the purse strings of the city. Certainly that's something that I think community members can maybe talk to their council members about, if there's a potential for some kind of assistance, maybe through our general fund grant program, possibly, or maybe we'll get a grant through, say, community development block grant or other agencies that might fund those types of projects for people. Usually there's a specified income parameters to qualify for that. So that's definitely something that I've been thinking about, that we need to do that, because I do understand that it's not necessarily feasible for everybody. Some of the improvements don't cost that much, but some may cost a bit more, and not everybody has the same level of cash flow for that. So we recognize that, and we'll be looking at that.
As a reminder to everyone, please type your questions into the chat box. We are going to do our best to save all the comments in the chat. At this time, it doesn't look like there are any more questions, but I'll give it a minute. Realize once again, you have to unmute before you start talking. Again, all the comments are going to be saved. At this time, there are no more questions. Thank you, David, Susan, Jerry, for coming and discussing this plan. This session is being recorded and will be on the website at some point in the future. Excuse me. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation. Appreciate it.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.
David, Jerry, Susan, and Sarah.
Thank you. Dave, thank you, sir.
Take care, Jerry.
All right, you as well. Thank you.
Good job, Jerry.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks for your help. Thanks for your backup.
Thank you, Dave.
Sarah, is Sarah still on there?
I'm still here.
Sarah, I can't even shut the thing off.